Hi, my name is Patti Kelly, and I'm the Parish Social Worker at St. Edith. I'm here today to talk about building resilience in children. Today we're going to talk about what the definition of resilience is. It's a word that's used a lot in the media. It's kind of a buzzword the past couple of years. We're going to talk about what it means to be resilient. Next, we're going to talk about the science behind resilience. There's been a lot of studies done recently about resilience and about how you can measure it and about how you can see its effects in someone's life. So we're going to talk about those things. And then finally, we're going to wind up with talking about practical ways that we can try to help build resilience in our children. So we're going to get right to it. What is resilience? I like to use the image of a rubber band, right? When you think about something that can stretch out and then bounce back into shape, that's what we're talking about with resilience. A person's under a stressful situation, significant adversity, yet they're able to recover quickly from their difficulties. That's a good way to think about it. Another good definition is resilience is when a person has the strength, the coping skills, and the mindset to be able to recover from hardships and be prepared for future challenges. Another way to think about it is that resilience is a positive adaptation to a significant adversity. Resilience doesn't mean that a child isn't able to express emotions or feelings when something happens. As you can see in the slide on the screen, there are frustrations. And on the top picture, a child is trying to do some homework and gets frustrated, and they're experiencing some emotion at that point, and that's okay. What we want is that the child can then recover from the emotion and then be able to go ahead and say, okay, I need to do X, Y, and Z to be able to finish this homework. Maybe they need to ask a parent or a fellow student. Maybe they need to regroup or go back and look at their notes. Resilience is when this child is able to say, having difficulty, but what can I do to get moving forward? In the bottom picture, the child falls off a bike. That's something that's going to happen. So they're allowed to experience those emotions that might happen. There might be some crying. There might be some saying that they don't want to get on the bike again. But then after an appropriate amount of time, they kind of pick themselves up and say, okay, I'm ready to try again. This doesn't become something that just they can't recover from. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about resilience. Resilience is also something that it's not something that you're either born with or not. Everybody has a capacity to be resilient. It's also not a resource that can be used up. So it's something that's built and it can be used in the future. Can resilience be measured? Sometimes you can measure it by seeing it, right? The pictures that we're seeing on the slide, you can see that child falls off the bike, then they get up. They have a difficulty and then they recover. Sometimes we see them visually. But resilience has also been measured in the lab by how kids' brains, immune systems, and genes respond to stressful situations. Is it possible to build resilience in children? And that's really the essence of what we're going to talk about today. And the short answer is yes. We know that even though kids are hardwired differently, if you have more than one kid, you know that. They don't all respond the same to different situations. Some respond very strongly to positive situations. Some respond very strongly to negative situations. Some have a more mild-mannered response. But it is possible to build resilience in any child. And it's going to serve them well. Why? The reason why we're talking about resilience is because in order to be able to function in school, in social settings, in family life, if a child is not able to recover from minor upsets, changes to the routine, difficulties that they experience, it can be very difficult for them to be able to get through the day because there'll be a lot of meltdowns, a lot of tantrums, a lot of not being able to complete things. So what we want are kids that, we can't protect them from experiencing these difficulties and hardships. As parents, we want to try, but we're not always going to be able to do that. So what we want them to be able to have are the skills that they need to be able to get through difficult situations. And that's really what resilience is. Saying, yes, difficulties happen, but I'm going to pull myself together, get back on track, and finish what I was doing. So that's what we want. It's going to help us now, and it's going to help the child now and help family life now to go more smoothly. And it's also going to serve them well later. There's going to be a time when they're not with you, and they're going to experience things that are difficult in college, in their jobs, in future relationships, just life in general is going to produce stressors for them. So we want them to be able to use those foundational skills and resilience to be able to get through those things, to survive and thrive. There's a study that was done in Australia, and the researchers ended up calling the kids rubber band kids. So we're back to our rubber band analogy, right? They did a program in grade school called Kids Matter, and they taught the kids social emotional learning skills. And these, they found after the course of the study that helping children learn skills around building resilience did in fact in the end build the resilience. They came out of the program being able to recover more quickly from difficult situations. And another thing that they found was that the kids who were in this program, who showed that they built resilience, also then later on had better mental health outcomes. So resilience is related to mental health. So the more resilient a child is, typically, the better their mental health outcomes are going to be. The less resilient a child is, typically, the less well their mental health outcomes are going to be. So it's important in that situation as well. Resilience plays a factor in a lot of different areas of a child's life. We're going to talk about a study now called ACEs. And ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And what are those? ACEs are those potentially traumatic experiences that occur before a child turns 18. So the researchers determine those to be things like any type of abuse, physical, sexual, or emotional, growing up in a family with mental health or substance abuse problems, or an incarcerated parent, and violence. So either a victim of violence or witnessing domestic violence or witnessing community violence. Those were the main categories that they looked at. And this was a study done about 30 years ago. It was a very large study of 15,000 people. And these were people who were randomly selected, so they weren't doing poorly, they weren't doing very well off, they were just kind of your average, typical person. And they gave people questionnaires and they said, how many of these ACEs did you experience before you turned 18? And the researchers were really surprised by the outcomes, because more than 70% of those who were studied had experienced at least one ACE during their childhood. They didn't think it would be that many. Many people experienced many ACEs, which was also surprising to the researchers. But why we're talking about this today is because the researchers went back after all the results were done, and they dug into this subgroup of people who had a lot of ACEs, so they had a lot of bad things happen to them during their childhood, yet they had really good outcomes for physical health, mental health, and life situations. Typically, those people who have a lot of ACEs didn't have good outcomes. But there was a subset of people who seemed to be able to thrive even though they were growing up in very difficult circumstances. So when they dug into the smaller group of people, what they found out was those people had what they termed protective factors. And we're going to talk a little bit about those now. Protective factors are what the researchers termed those things that buffered. They were like a shield to buffer the negative experiences that happened to that person. And they narrowed it down to 6 things that really help people be able to overcome these very difficult experiences in childhood. One was concrete support. Did the child have the basic things they needed to live? Food, shelter, clothing, things like that. The second was social and emotional competence. So did the child have some attachment when they were little to parents? Or were they able to get experiences that would build their social emotional learning? The third is parental resilience. So did they see their parents experience difficult situations and be able to overcome them and thrive? Did they have social connections when they were growing up? So was extended family involved? Were there community people involved, neighbors? Did they belong to a faith organization, or were they involved in their school? Were there other people in their life that were there to support the family throughout the difficult circumstances? The next is nurturing attachment. Did they have a consistent caregiver who provided a good level of nurturing for the child when they were growing up? And did their parents or caregivers have at least a basic knowledge of parenting and child development? And that's important because that can help parents be able to set discipline that's appropriate, to be able to set appropriate expectations for what the child can do developmentally. So what they found was that if people had these protective factors, it really helped the child be able to have better outcomes in the future. So that was important to know, because there are things that can help when people experience traumatic things in their life. So all of that science, the ACEs study, the other studies that were done regarding building resilience in children really have helped form this body of literature that helps us learn about what can help build resilience in children. And the one consistent thing across all the studies and every piece of literature that you read on this is that the most important thing a child needs is at least one person in their life who's consistent, caring, and stable, who's an adult that they can rely on when things get difficult, who they can turn to when they have questions or need help. It's that person who's always going to be there, who they know will always be there when things go bad, so that they can be taken care of, on a basic level, and also, emotionally as well. And that was really important. When kids don't have that for an extended period of time, their body goes into a mode of crisis, and they are unable to really develop that sense of security that happens if you don't have a stable, consistent caregiver. And it can lead to poor physical and mental health outcomes. And it can lead them to really be able to, really have difficulty functioning later on in life. About 20 years ago, there were a lot of research done about children who were in orphanages in Russia and other Eastern European countries. And they did not have any connection to any stable caregiver. They didn't have any interactions. And it really affected them later in life, being able to have relationships with other people, being able to function in a classroom setting and things like that. So this one stable adult caretaker is really important and critical. Developing brains need consistent serve and return interactions. That's another key piece of it. And what you see in the slide, the guys playing ping pong, I thought was a really good visual of that. So serve and return, when we're talking about communication and interacting with kids, is when we're saying something or they say something and we then respond with something. And then we do something and they then respond. So it's that back and forth that you have. So if you think about an interaction with a baby, and you might look at the baby and start make cooing noises, and then the baby makes a noise back at you, and then you make the cooing noise back. And it goes back and forth like that. Those are really key. Babies and children are looking at, they're listening to our language, they're looking at our faces, they're looking at our body language, they're hearing the tone of our voice. All of these things are building up connections in their brain that are really foundational for them to being able to learn other more complex social skills in the future. Serve and return interactions are not just for babies, they're also for children too. So toddlers, interacting with toddlers, asking them questions. When you're out and about in the environment, asking them things. When you're in the grocery store, oh, do you see that, vegetable there? What color is that? And they're answering, and then you ask questions back. Those back and forths are really important. Even with junior high kids and high school kids, it can be hard to get that serve and return. But a lot of times you have to talk about the subjects that they're interested in. So it might be sports, it might be Pokemon, it might be other video games and things like that. And it's important that the interaction, the serve and returns, are verbal. A lot of times teens are really good with serve and returns texting, but again, you're missing out on all those other components of it. You're missing out on the tone of voice side. They're missing out on the facial expression. They're missing out on the body language. Those are all important for them to learn. Their brain is taking in more than just the actual words. It's taking in the entire experience. So these serve and returns are really key. Serve and returns are also, we talked previously about the kids that were in orphanages in the Eastern European countries. What they found was that those kids weren't getting any, not only did they not have a consistent caregiver, they weren't getting those critical serve and return interactions. They were basically put in a crib and only just given the very basic minimum care. Without those serve and return interactions, they missed all that foundational brain building that happens during that time. So then when they are of school age, they had a really difficult time interacting with peers, controlling their impulses, learning speech and language, all those things. So it is a really critical thing that happens. In developing brains, we're not just talking about babies and young children. Brains are developing throughout our lives, mostly between 0 and 25 years old. but our brain has a lot of development throughout our life. So it's not something, even if you have older kids, that you should just write off. We should go back and talk about how important it is to do these serve and return interactions with kids. This I just thought was a really good quote from the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child about the importance of this. These interactions, and they're referring to serve and return interactions, provide the scaffolding that help build key capacities, such as the ability to plan, monitor, and regulate behavior, and adapt to changing circumstances. So resiliency. It enables the child to respond to adversity and to thrive. So it really is a key foundational concept. This cartoon I like to use, and I just put serve and return. Is this serve and return? So we have a father who's looking at his iPhone, and the baby's in the stroller behind him looking at an adult's iPhone, and they're playing peekaboo through the phone. So I would say no, that's not the kind of serve and return that we're looking for. We're really looking for those face-to-face interactions. I know during the pandemic we relied on screens a lot more than we had in the past, and sometimes it was a child's only link to relatives that were far away or friends that they couldn't see in person. We really need to kind of be moving from that screen time sort of relationships to real live face-to-face relationships, because again, they're missing out on a lot of development if they're solely relying on the screen to be able to interact with people. That person is not a three-dimensional real person. They're missing out on a lot of things there. So I would just say that there's good times to use screens, and there's limited uses that will be helpful for kids, and that we kind of need to relook now that the pandemic is winding down and we're getting back to normal life, that we need to look at the amount of screen time our kids are having so that we make sure that it's not too much of the time, that they're getting those really critical person-to-person interactions. So now we're going to move to the part of the presentation that talks about what we can do to help build resilience in children. And if you Google this, a million different things will come up. And I just picked 6 that I thought would be things that could be easily implemented and that would work for a lot of different ages. You might Google or find books or articles or websites or other things that might provide other ones. And some of those might work better for your child. So parents know best what's going to work for their kids and what the best way to implement these things are. So what we're going to talk about today are having consistent rules and expectations, helping children learn to name and express feelings, providing safe opportunities to promote independence, resist rescuing children from everyday upsets, how important it is to be a role model, and it takes a village. Okay, let's move right into that first one, consistency. And consistency really is key. I heard somebody in a talk one time say children don't need perfect parents, but they need predictable parents. And that really made an impact on me. We don't need to be able to provide the best toys, the best experiences, and all these different things for our kids. What we really need to do is to be predictable for them so they know what to expect, and they know that consistency is there. It gives them safety. So consistency plays into a lot of different things. One is when we set expectations for our child. So if we say we're going grocery shopping, I'm going to set expectations of X, Y, and Z. And if you meet these expectations, then you get the reward. Then you need to follow through on that. You need to be consistent with that. If they do meet those expectations, then the reward needs to happen. And if they don't meet those expectations, then even though the child may not be happy, the reward doesn't happen. So that's one part of consistency that's really important. Another part of consistency that's really important is when we're talking about transitions. And transitions are when a child is changing from one activity to another. So it might be we're leaving a friend's house and we're going home, or we're leaving grandma's house and we're going home, or it's time for bed. So we're leaving playtime or whatever we were doing in the evening, and now we're getting ready for bed. Those can be really difficult for kids. So the more consistent you are when those things happen, the better the outcome's going to be. So for example, if you're at grandma's house and it's getting ready to be time to go, you give a consistent message to your child that, okay, we're going to be leaving in about 10 minutes, so why don't we start cleaning up now before we go? Or if they're leaving a friend's house, the same thing. So they have a little bit of time to think about it. We're not just grabbing and picking them up and rushing out the door. And they're also learning, hey, before we leave somebody's house, we clean up. That's what we do before we go. So it sets those expectations in a very consistent way. For things like bedtime, this is really important. It can make your life a whole lot easier in the long run. I don't know if you've ever seen a child running around in the evening, they're having fun, they're playing, then all of a sudden a parent just plucks them up and says, okay, it's time for bed, and tries to lay them down for bed. It usually doesn't go that well because the child's all revved up, they had no idea bedtime was coming, they thought they were going to continue playing, and bedtime may not go that smoothly. What works a lot better is if you have a consistent bedtime routine. So the child knows what to expect, they know what's going to happen next, their body begins to calm down, and bedtime is going to go smoother that way. It provides them a sense of safety and security that is really going to add order to their days. Okay, so we talked a little bit about routines. I know that some people don't like that word routines. They think it's too structured, or they're going to be too boxed in. There's no way to have any flexibility. And that's not the case at all. Of course, we know even if you have a routine, there's going to be some days around holidays or just other days that just are not following the routine. When my kids were little, we would go to the drive-in once a year, and that was definitely not a routine night, right? Because the drive-in started even after their bedtime. And then they were eating candy and pop and having all that stuff, and we didn't get home until very late. That was a fun night, and we remember those nights. Those are good memories, but that wasn't every night. Those kind of nights have to be rare. The normal routine should be kind of your everyday night. Again, a child will know what to expect, and they feel safe. And the nighttime routine can also have provide early experiences of being nurtured, loved, and cared for. So you see that picture on the slide with the mom cuddled with the two kids, they're reading a book, they're snuggling up. Kids need that physical contact, they need that closeness. And sometimes their days are so busy that that's only happening at bedtime. So we have to make sure that happens during the day. Routines also do another really important thing that helps kids with what we call executive function skills. So the ability to control impulses, the ability to regulate their behavior, the ability to take turns, wait, those kinds of things. It promotes the development of self-regulation skills, which is a really key function. It's going to help kids in school. They're going to be able to follow directions. They're going to be able to wait turns if they're playing a game, and they're going to have more positive social interactions. We're going to look in a short video that's going to help us understand self-regulation a little bit better. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that little video with Cookie Monster helping us learn about self-regulation. So when we're looking at this slide, it just gives you some examples of different nighttime routines. There's a lot of things that are available online that can help make this sort of a fun activity for a child to make. A little bulletin board that has what their nighttime routine is going to be, or you can get a whiteboard and write down what the routine is going to be with pictures or words. It doesn't have to be long. It shouldn't be more than 15 to 20 minutes because you want to keep it something so it's actually doable. And I recommend to parents to start a routine right when you're bringing the baby home from the hospital. It's possible to do that with babies, and it's good to do that. They've done studies where they put heart rate monitors and pulsometers on babies as parents are calming them down and getting them doing the bedtime routine. And as babies begin to notice around them what's happening, so the lights might be turning down low, the parents' voices might be lower, they might be starting a lullaby or a familiar book with them, or starting the bath water, whatever their particular routine is, the baby begins to calm down. Their heart rate slows down, their breathing slows down. It helps get them ready physically for bed, and it can be easier to get them to sleep as well. So just some suggestions there on nighttime routines. When we're talking about nighttime routines, we also have to talk about adequate sleep. There's a few things that you need to keep in check when you're trying to build resilience in children. It's really difficult to do that with a child who's chronically tired. We know that kids who are tired can be irritable, they can have headaches, they can have difficulty concentrating, they can begin to have physical symptoms, they can begin to have depression, migraines, they're more likely to be have a propensity for obesity. There's a lot of different things can happen when a child is chronically tired. So it's good every once in a while to go back and look at their sleep schedule and make sure that they're getting enough sleep. On the screen, you can see what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends for sleep for different ages of children. It always is a good reminder to parents because it's usually a lot more than what our kids are getting. So even teenagers need more sleep than what we think. I think it's 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night, which when you think about how late some kids stay up and how early they have to get up for school, you know, it's not always within that amount. So we need to look at the amount of activities our kids are doing in the evening and make sure it's not cutting into their sleep time. We also need to look, you know, when they go to bed, if they're bringing electronics into their room, that can be a problem because they can be on it when we don't know it, and they can be on it very late into the night. So it's better if kids don't have any electronics in their room. You can control the Wi-Fi in your house too, so it can turn off at certain times so that their devices can't access it. And sometimes those are good limits to put in place because we really want to preserve that sleep time for kids. It really is key. When we're sleeping, that's when our brain does all the processing of what happened during the day. So it's processing and packaging and storing all the different experiences we had. It's also a time when the brain and the body are growing and developing. And with so much development that happens in childhood, it's really key that kids are getting enough sleep so that it can adequately support their development. And when we talk about sleep, we also talk about nutrition because that's another thing that we need to make sure is in check. And I recommend to parents to check that periodically. If your child's behavior seems different or seems like there might be some difficulty, it's always good to check to make sure that their nutrition is sufficient. When kids don't have enough nutrition, they're also unable to have what they need to be able to develop physically and mentally, right? It's hard for their brain and body to work properly and to grow properly without the right nutrition. I mean, we see behavior changes in ourselves when we're hungry or dehydrated, and we also see behavior changes in our children. So we want to make sure that they're getting enough to eat and drink and that it's nutritionally adequate for them. So those are things that you might want to check. With older kids, it's helpful for them to learn that as well. So if an older kid, a teenager is feeling stressed out and tired and they're having difficulty handling things, maybe they're melting down a little bit more than they usually do, you know, it's good to help them learn. Well, think about it. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting the right food? Are you getting exercise? Those are things that they can use in the future when they are out on their own and they're starting to feel run down and they can't handle things and stressed out. Go back to the basics. You know, is my eating right? Am I sleeping enough? And am I exercising sufficiently? So that's some of the basic building blocks for resilience that we should be on top of as parents. Now we're going to move on to the next tip, which is learning how to name and express feelings. So we call it name it to tame it. And for this one, we're going to look at a short clip from the movie Inside Out that's going to help us think about the strong emotions that kids can have and how do we name them.
Ugh.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed looking at. That's a really good movie to watch with your kids as well, to talk about the different emotions and how to name them and how they sometimes express themselves and how we can keep them under control. There's a lot of resources available in this area about learning how to name and express emotions. One of the best things that you can do is, pick up some books at the library, or your child's teacher might be able to recommend some books about feelings and talk about how the characters in the book are feeling. And have you ever felt that way? And what do you do when you feel that way? And does that work well when you express your emotion that way? Those kinds of things help kids relate what they see in a book or a movie to their real life, and they can learn some skills that way. For older kids, it might be through a movie, or even through, if they watch the news, there can be things that happen in the news that you can relate to their lives. And you can ask them about school. What happened at school today? Oh, you lost the basketball game. How did that make you feel? How did you express that? All those kinds of things help kids to be able to learn what all the different emotions are, and how they can express it and how they can handle them. When we put language, either verbally or in writing, to our emotions, that's a left brain activity. That helps to control some of the emotional side of our brain on the right side. So using that left side to help put a little bit of control on the right side can help, even though we're not even aware of that going on. So that's always a good suggestion, to have kids talk about it and write about it. There's a lot of resources available online for these. This is one of the really good things that the internet can be used for. There's a site called childhood101.com. It's a woman who's a mom and a teacher. She has a lot of free resources, things like a lot of printable things, different games you can play, different charts you can put up, feelings wheels, feelings charts, feelings thermometers, all those kind of things help kids to learn about this. For older kids, there's a good site called truthtobetoldquotes.com. Those have a lot of coloring pages, writing prompts, different things that are more appropriate for older kids, junior high or high school. For little kids, Sesame Street and Communities, which is where I access the Cookie Monster video, has a lot of different topics about feelings, about how to control them, what happens when you don't control them, and things like that, with characters that the kids are familiar with. So that's a good resource. So I encourage you to check those out. The next step we're going to talk about in building resilience is the importance of providing safe opportunities that promote independence. So I know that in the world that we live in today, sometimes kids don't get as much opportunity to do that independent exploring like we may have done when we were younger. We may not feel safe to let our kids out to do those kinds of things. And so kids' worlds are becoming a little bit smaller that way. So we need to make sure that we can think of and provide for them safe opportunities that still help to build their independence. When they do these activities, it provides them opportunities to learn problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, planning, and resiliency, which is really important. So some of the safe opportunities that I like to promote are things like if you go to the library. These are all going to depend on the age level of your child and their developmental level. So you'll know what your child can handle at what point or not. But even if you go to the library as a family, setting up on a table, and of course, if it's appropriate age-wise and developmentally for your child, to have them go look for books on their own and then come back to the table when they pick them out. And then take their library card and go to the librarian and check out the books. For an older child, it might be letting them ride their bike to the library. And they go into the library on their own, they pick out their books, and they come back. A lot of different opportunities there. And what we have to realize is that, yes, we can help get them prepared to go. So, they bring their library card, they bring different things, they get to the library. But let's say they get to the library, they pick out the books, they go to the librarian, and the library card's expired. That gives them an opportunity to say, whoa, there's a little bump in the road here. And between talking with the librarian and figuring out what they can do, they can overcome that. And that gives them a really good opportunity to say, wow, there was a little challenge here, but I was able to solve it. And that can really help build their confidence and their ability to then solve bigger problems in the future. Different times when I've given this presentation, we've had feedback from the audience. Some of the suggestions from other parents have been things like, allowing them to walk to a friend's house that's in the neighborhood. Or for older children, dropping them off at when you go to the grocery store to pick up a couple items, having them go in, giving them the money and having them go in and finding the items, purchasing them, and bringing them out to the car. There's a number of different opportunities there for them to figure things out on their own if they need to. And that's basically what you're providing for them. It's not this situation where you figured everything out and they're not going to experience any difficulty. They might experience a little difficulty, and that's okay, because these are safe places for them to do that. If they don't have the right change, or if they can't find the item, then they can figure that out on their own. They can ask someone at the store, or ask the cashier, or if worse comes to worse, they can come out to the car and ask you again. But there's safe opportunities that can promote independence, and that's really important for our kids to have those chances to be able to do that, because those are critical skills that they're going to need when they get out on their own. Next, we're going to talk about the fourth tip, which is resist rescuing them from everyday upsets. And I know this one is very hard to do. We don't want our child to have to experience any negative consequences, right? But those consequences are built in there for a reason, because these are safe times for them to learn about things like what happens if you forget to turn in your homework. They might have to do an extra homework, or they might have to do a detention at lunchtime, or things like that. Those are safe opportunities for them to learn natural consequences of when you don't do something you were supposed to do. That's a lot easier than when they get older, and let's say they forget to pay their rent and they get an eviction notice. That's what we want to try to avoid. Little kids, little problems; big kids, big problems. So we want to make sure that we're letting them experience these natural consequences. Of course, again, age and developmentally appropriate. We're not talking about things that would be endangering their safety. We're talking about if they forget their lunch. They're not going to starve if they have to eat the backup lunch that the cafeteria gives out that day. I can bet that if they forget their lunch too many times and they have to eat that cheese sandwich that's provided by the cafeteria, they're going to start remembering that they need to remember to bring their lunch. It also gives you a chance to say, okay, you forgot your lunch twice this week. What are some things we can do to try to help so that that doesn't happen again? And have them come up with ideas with you and brainstorm. So it might be, well, maybe I need to wake up earlier. Maybe I need to write a sticky note on my place at the table when I eat breakfast to remember my lunchbox. Maybe I put my lunchbox in my backpack the night before. I mean, there's any number of different things that they can do to help prevent them from forgetting their lunch. But if they forget their lunch and we bring them up, we drive up their lunch every day to school when they forget it, they're never going to be able to learn those things that they could learn from that experience. So same thing with homework. I know it's hard after they leave for school and you're getting ready to leave and you see the project they've been working on for weeks sitting at the table. It's really hard not to be able to pick that up and bring it to school and say, oh, can you give this to Johnny? He forgot it today. I encourage you to do that, because again, these are safe times when they will learn that there are consequences for not doing what you were supposed to do. It's difficult for us to see our kids upset, and I think that's a lot of reason why why it's so hard for us not to go bring something up there so we can make things all better. But in the long run, it's going to be, your child's going to be better off, because they'll know that there are consequences and they happen. The next thing we're going to talk about is the importance of being a role model. And it's important, again, developmentally to your child and age appropriately for your child, to let your child see you having feelings and how you handle it. And again, it depends on what the circumstances in terms of the level of emotion and things like that. But you don't want your child to think that you're never sad. or that you're never upset, or that you're never disappointed, because they're not going to know that people experience that feeling, and then they can not experience that feeling and feel better again. And that's really important for them to see. And I'm going to use as an example for my kids for this. Some years ago, when they were in late junior high, about to enter high school, I was looking for a new job. And I didn't want to share with them too much about what was going on, because I didn't want them to see me upset if an interview didn't go well, or if I didn't get an interview, or if I didn't get the offer I wanted, or whatever. I was shielding them from that. And then as my children, during the course of that, my daughter started looking for a job for the summer. And it made me realize that if she doesn't see that it's not all happy times when you're searching for a job, and that there might be some disappointment in that her view of that might be very unrealistic. And so that I should share appropriately that, oh man, it really stinks because I didn't get the job that I thought I might get. And that makes me really upset. I'm sad about that. For them to be able to hear that and see how I handled it, and then see how I came out of that, is a really important learning opportunity, even though it can be difficult for us to be vulnerable like that and share that with our child. Another thing that a lot of times people shield children from is grief. And so we don't bring them to the funeral home, we don't bring them to the funeral, we don't let them see other people being sad. But if we don't let them see that, then they're not going to know that sadness is an appropriate emotion and how we express that, but yet it doesn't make us sad all the time, and it doesn't mean that we're going to be sad forever. So allowing them to witness that kind of full range of the sadness and a funeral, to then things get better over time. If we don't let them see that, it can be really a missed opportunity for them to learn how to express emotion and sort of the natural progression of emotion. So it can be hard because, again, you're vulnerable. We don't want our kids to be sad. We don't want our kids to see other people sad, but it's important for them to be able to see that. And know that whether or not you're thinking about it or not, your child is watching you and learning from you and how you respond to different things. So that's really important. And finally, I think this term is a little bit overused, but it does take a whole village to raise a child, and the importance of being connected to a community, being connected to extended family if you have them in the area. It might be a community from school or church or a sport community, but it's really important for children to feel that there are other people around them, and for you also to be getting that support from other parents. You know, parenting is not an easy job, and it's not something that was ever meant to be done alone. We need the support of other parents and other people in our life so that we can continue to move forward. And when we have hard times, then we have people that we can rely on. And when we need advice, we have people that we can ask. And when things are going rough, if there's people around that can help us get through, that can be really important. So as we're coming out of the pandemic, it's really important to reconnect with those different groups that you were a part of in the past, or search out new groups if you were not connected to groups, or reconnect with friends and neighbors and other people, because that community is really important. It's really critical for us as we're raising our children. So thank you for listening to the presentation today. If you have any questions, or if you want to talk to me further, my contact information is on the screen. Thank you.